A few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to preview Final Fantasy XVI during a demo event at Square Enix here in Los Angeles. As many of you know, I absolutely adore the Final Fantasy franchise. I've clocked hundreds of hours into 14 and its expansions, and I consider that game, as well as Final Fantasy VI, the Final Fantasy VII Remake, Final Fantasy XII, and Final Fantasy Tactics to be 5 of my favorite video games of all time. But with that said, I wasn't really someone who was feeling the hype going into 16. The trailers were all exciting, but the darker tone of the game and its action-heavy focus gradually started to make me lose interest in a year where it seems like there's a new amazing game every week. But then, I played Final Fantasy XVI. Now, a couple disclaimers real quick. During my preview session, I got to play about 6 hours of the game, ranging from a combat demo, a lengthy prologue to the story, an open field area, and a forest section. But due to some pretty heavy spoilers, I'm going to avoid describing my moment-to-moment experience and just kind of give my general impressions on the story before diving into talking about the gameplay itself. Now, while I'm not somebody who normally likes the high fantasy Game of Thrones-esque aesthetic, the team behind Final Fantasy XVI really made it work here. Not only did I find myself instantly connecting with the main protagonist Clive, I also really loved the supporting cast. Benedicta, who you've probably seen in the trailers and promo artwork, I guarantee you is going to become a fan favorite character, as is this game's version of Sid, who's got a great swagger about him. The character's writing is snappy, and I was honestly shocked the first time that one of these characters swore. This is a much darker script in tone, but once you play through the prologue, you'll understand very quickly why that is and why it was the right choice for this game. Stakes are high, and it's a much more personal story than we've had in the last few mainline iterations. I found the dialogue and the story to be very well written, and there's a level of attention to detail in the game's visuals that really managed to endear these characters to me. For example, there was a character I ran into very early in the game who fumbles around when casting a spell, and right away I wanted to reach through the screen and help him out. There's also a lot of lore here for people who want it via some optional story logs, but the game does a really good job of not forcing too much on you if you're much more interested in the gameplay. First and foremost, let's talk about the combat in Final Fantasy XVI, because this was both the thing I was most interested to try for myself, and also the thing that I was really nervous about before going into the event. Now, while I know there were a ton of people who were thrilled with the recent FF16 State of Play, if you're familiar with my channel at all, then you probably already know a couple things I'm about to reiterate here. First off, I'm really not the biggest fan of action games. I've always acknowledged that games like Bayonetta and Devil May Cry are well designed, but after a few hours or so, I find myself feeling a little nauseous when playing them. Now, keep in mind, I never feel sick playing FPS games, and there are definitely exceptions to this, like the recent God of War games, or action RPGs like Kingdom Hearts and Final Fantasy VII Remake, but overall, I try to steer clear of action-heavy titles. So, when I noticed that the combat this time around was much more action-oriented than even something like the FF7 Remake, I started to worry a bit, but thankfully, after 5 or so hours of playing Final Fantasy XVI, I am incredibly happy to report that the dev team seems to have found a sweet spot for gamers like myself who find themselves a little more action-averse. To kick things off, I cannot stress enough how fluid, streamlined, and fun the combat is. At nearly every opportunity, I found myself wanting to engage with enemies instead of avoiding them, even in the long stretches that would normally feel tedious in other games. The controls are super simple. You attack with square, jump with X, press triangle to fire off a quick ranged elemental attack, and use the circle button to Phoenix Shift, which allows you to close in on enemies. And then finally, if you hold down the circle button, you'll be able to choose from different icon abilities that allow you to customize your combat even further. Utilizing these different icon powers is so much fun, and even with the limited tools at my disposal during the early portions that I played, I found myself really messing around with the different playstyles and styling at enemies. Clive had a wide variety of abilities to upgrade, and things got even more fun once I was able to implement Clive's dog Torgal into the mix too. With a few easy commands, Torgal can heal you, sick or ravage enemies, and even outside of combat, his animal instinct ability can help lead you in the right direction of your objective. And yes, before anybody asks, you can indeed pet Torgal. The big thing that really stood out to me though, as someone who's more into traditional RPGs than action games, were the new optional accessories. Right from the jump, players are able to equip a number of accessories that can simplify aspects of the combat to help customize their gameplay's difficulty. For example, if you're not great at timing your dodges, there's a ring that can automatically allow you to evade attacks so you can focus entirely on the action at hand as opposed to worrying about your timing. Another accessory can heal you if your HP drops drops below a certain point. Now, all of this is completely optional, and I think that adds to the brilliance of the combat in Final Fantasy XVI. With the right accessory, even players who are unfamiliar with action games, or like myself, aren't particularly skilled at them, will feel like a master of the combat in no time. But above all else, the big thing that really blew me away in terms of the game were the icon battles. Without diving too much into story spoilers, there was a fight that I got to experience underneath a castle at one point during my play session, and this fight literally had my jaw on the floor. Do you remember that old trailer for Final Fantasy XV where Noctis was cinematically jumping around debris and fighting Leviathan in the skies of the Accordo capital? I do. I also remember what that fight actually ended up playing like in the final game. It was a disappointing encounter that, while cool in parts, didn't even come close to the majesty of what that trailer promised. Even in the early build of FF16 that I played though, I can safely say that is not the case with this game. The icon battle that I played genuinely felt like I was controlling a cutscene in the best possible way. Gorgeous fire effects filled the screen while an enormous creature was leaping at me and tearing down the environment around us. The music came to an incredibly hype crescendo just as I landed the final blow, and if this is at all like any of the other icon battles in the final game, I think people are going to be very, very impressed. Overall, I'm just so happy to report that I walked away from my preview session as a firm believer in Final Fantasy XVI. I had quite a few reservations before walking through the doors, ranging from my potential lack of interest in the story due to its grittier aesthetic, as well as the action-heavy gameplay, but all of those worries washed away once I got to experience the game for myself. I really feel now that if any game has the potential to swipe the title of Game of the Year from Tears of the Kingdom, it's going to be Final Fantasy XVI.